Today's keynote speaker. Phil Myrick is one of the world's leading practitioners of placemaking, applying decades of research into how people interact with their environments and each other to create vibrant places, destinations, districts, and developments. As a 20-year veteran of the Project for Public Spaces and former CEO, he has helped hundreds of communities improve their quality of life, strengthen neighborhood ties, stimulate economic development, and engage and empower citizens in the process. I'm honored to introduce Phil and his symposium session called Public Spaces Provide Key Role for Communities Post-Pandemic. Welcome, Phil. We're so glad you're here with us today.
Thanks, Linda. Well, listen, it's a real pleasure for me to be with you here today at the Symposium in the Sky. Great name. Laura Kunkel approached me a couple of months ago, and she had read an article of mine called the Recovery Will Happen in Public Space. And so she obviously saw some kind of connection between what's been happening in the post-pandemic, even during the pandemic, the reaction that different cities have had towards their treatment of public space, and America in Bloom. And she saw the connection, and I really applaud her for making that connection, because she's right. And I guess my goal for today is to help you see that connection and to really think about it in terms of there being some kind of strategic opportunity for America in Bloom. What that is exactly, I wouldn't be the person to ask, but I feel like there's something there that could be explored and really become part of, what is America in Bloom going to be doing in 2022, 2023? It's just really interesting to think about. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully this will work with the expertise that I've developed over the last year. Boom. Hopefully that's now showing as a presentation. So, and let me just start by saying I'm a big admirer of what you folks do. The attention to detail and the importance of making these communities more attractive and bringing the plant world to the people. I look at these pictures and I recognize that you're really helping to create the kind of community that I want to live in. And I think, a lot of people see the quality of place that you're all creating, and it clicks. And part of what I think is happening in, since we all went into lockdown and then started to come back during this whole pandemic, is that perhaps more and more people are seeing that connection, and that these places, these qualities of places that have beauty and care expressed, and lavish attention being lavished, the quality of those places really matters more to people than ever before. And I want to make this point about incrementalism and doing small things. It's my opinion that working at the small scale is really where a lot of the best work gets done in towns, in cities. Vincent van Gogh thought the same thing. He had this great quote, "Great things are done by a series of small things brought together." And I really relate to that, because a lot of the work in my career is also at this small scale improvements of places. My own background is I guess I really cut my teeth at the Project for Public Spaces. That's where I spent most of my career, most recently as the CEO. Since then, I've gone off on my own, and so I'm doing 100% focus on working directly with communities in terms of making better places. So not conjoined with the powerhouse PPS in terms of building a worldwide movement around placemaking and having international conferences and the like, but really focused much more on the, being in the field, working with community members, helping them strategize and create these really wonderful places, particularly in downtown environments, Main Street environments, but really all kinds of environments. And you know, there's this term placemaking. I'm guessing a lot of you are familiar with the term. It's a term that PPS really popularized and pushed and advocated for, and it's become a really big movement around the world as an alternative way to think about how do we create better places to live that that really sparks affection and creates that sense of belonging, right? And for some people, placemaking means these, you know, like this picture here. This is an image I took recently in Littleton, New Hampshire. For some people, it means this pop-up kind of tactical installations that brightens up a place and makes it, you know, really, you know, a big improvement in a short term. There's, you know, to me, placemaking is a lot of things. Part of it is just being a way to express your community and cultivate that sense of community in a place. And so it is always specific to, you know, we're improving a place, a specific place. To me, it also reinforces the identity of a community, and it builds social ties, it strengthens social ties, it creates vibrancy. You know, this is a waterfront that I worked on some years ago in Buffalo, New York, which had been this really vacant piece of land that got used a couple times a year for concerts, but sat empty the rest of the time. And, you know, starting with the really small stuff, we started to bring activity back to this waterfront and to make it beautiful and attractive and a place where people wanted to stay. So, you know, I'm not the guy, and you're not the people who are doing these big, huge projects to improve cities, right? We're not the people who are tearing down highways, you know, building a new linear park in downtown Boston. We're not the people who are doing projects that land on the cover of Architectural Digest, like this project in Copenhagen, right? We're the people who do, you know, bring in the movable chairs and plant the flowers and do that level of improvement with a lot of community involvement and really sort of building that caring community. And really appreciate, you know, what Peter Kagayama has done over the years, talking about our places and our cities and our towns in this very similar way, in terms of we're trying to create places that people love and that where they feel they're really attached and they belong. And, you know, that doesn't happen with those big, massive capital projects as much as it happens, you know, with the time and effort and smaller dollars that American Bloom members are putting into their own community. And, you know, we at PPS, we always used to also say, when you focus on place, you do everything differently, and you do things different. You don't take the traditional planning and design process. You're more interactive, you're more engaged, you're more incremental. You're doing things. You're starting with the petunias. This is 11 principles of placemaking that's been around for years now. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but I do want to just point out that, you know, the ninth principle was always starting with the petunias, and it's really just to say, start small. Don't get hung up on the need for more money, more permission, the stuff that bigger projects get stalled by oftentimes. But start small. Start with the petunias, and then you know, for years we've been at PPS pushing this idea of lighter, quicker, cheaper. And I want to just go through that very quickly because it's really part of a movement around placemaking and improving towns and cities that I think American Bloom members can really relate to. So some people call this tactical urbanism, and if that's you know, a word that connects to you, that's fine. You use that instead. But the idea is basically to start with an experiment. And so from left to right on the screen here, you see there's a demonstration project that got popped up, a protected bike lane, but it's really just paint on the pavement and some signs and obviously permission from the streets department in that community. But it's the type of thing that could happen over a weekend. And it's, you know, the whole selling point of it to your town officials is, hey, we're not doing any permanent changes here. Let us just try this. And, you know, if they're even still resistant, you can say, well, let's try it as an event. Let's try it for a weekend. And what it does is it allows room for people to relax and say, well, I guess it's all right if it's just going to be a trial run. But it gives you that chance to prove that, you know, there's demand for this idea from the public. And so, you know, from that first demonstration project, you can hopefully lengthen it to a pilot project that might last, you know, a month or 2 months. And then, you know, bit by bit, you can tweak the project because you haven't built it yet. So you can correct for any design flaws in the first, you know, experimental phase. But you can start to add things that make it a little bit more permanent. And then in the end, you know, these projects, in many cases, not always, but you know, the best of them will survive. It become a permanent project. And so, you know, what this does is it opens up the idea of improving a town or a community to all kinds of people who were shut out in the past, who through formal processes and permits and, you know, big capital budgets were just had no chance to impact their community in a physical way. And we're gonna spend a little bit more time on this because I think it's important for you to realize, if you don't already, that this is a really big trend that that I think you can capture in some ways. So here's an example of a project that PPS did back in 1995. So, you know, PPS has been talking about this for a very long time. On the left, you see a parking lot there, and that's in the center of San Bernardino, California. And the city wanted to do something to their downtown to make it, you know, a more attractive place where more visitors would come. And what we did was we said, well, let's see what we can do in 6 months. We set a timetable for us that was really aggressive. And so, you know, we had to be really we had to improvise. We had to use cheap materials. It was, you know, it was a matter of grass, some potted trees, some a stage that, you know, a local carpenter helped to build. And so all the pictures on the right are only six or 8 months later. And, you know, you'll notice there's also a street fair happening. So that's the same street that's in the left picture as you see on the far right, where there's an antique car show. And again, it was one of those instances where, because it was a pilot project, it's just an experiment, right? We were able to convince the city to restripe the parallel parking into diagonal parking. And again, they felt okay about doing this as long as it wasn't going to be pouring cement curbs and, you know, doing a complete street redesign project. But again, what it did was it showed the community and city planners and officials what this part of downtown San Bernardino could be like. And actually, within a few months of this being installed, there were markets happening there. There were different events. People were having weddings there. It really showed the power of this small scale, lighter, quicker, cheaper approach. In 2000, this is a project I worked on in New Hampshire. You know, we really started to explore more how redesign of streets could be tested using, you know, just temporary materials, rubber curbing and that kind of thing. So that before you actually go out and completely rebuild a street, you've tested it. And this was just the idea of a diverter in the middle of the street that you see in traffic calming that slows cars down as they come into town from the highway. And then in about 2005, the parklet movement began. And, you know, there had been this event that had already been running for a few years called Parking Day. And Parking Day became this worldwide event once a year, where communities around the world would close select parking spaces in their town for the day, and put out astroturf and chairs, and bring out chairs and flowers, and make it into a park. And they would have to pay the meter to make this legal. And the city couldn't do anything about it. And of course, many cities came to really be supportive of this idea. But the idea was like, there's all this space in our parking that's taken away from people. You know, maybe we treat our cars a little bit better than we treat ourselves. If we pay for that parking space, you know, can we do something different with it? And then this started to become formalized into what we call parklets. And so I'm sure some of your communities have these. They're a little bit more permanent, but they're still not permanent. You know, you can see this example. It's wood decking, and it's planters to protect and create that space, and it's some seating. And a lot of cities have been using this since the first city to really create a parklet program was San Francisco. But it's really taken off, and you'll see it in a lot of places. It's a way to sort of redesign the street without spending a lot of money. And it, you know, it depends on having cooperation with the restaurant that fronts it, or the store that fronts it. But it's been a very successful movement. Around 2010, you start to see these bigger interventions happening in street spaces, where you're taking more than a couple of parking spots. You're taking a whole lane away, but it's still in an experimental fashion. And so this is an example from Toronto, but certainly New York City was doing a lot of this work. And, you know, many other cities were starting to reevaluate street space and understand that, you know, over the decades, we've really overemphasized, you know, how important cars are in comparison to people, and that people, you know, we need to nibble back at this asphalt and create more people space. 2015, this is an image from Philadelphia, and you really see, you know, how their public artists are being brought in more and more often as partners to make these spaces look better and better, and they become, you know, often you'll see this kind of tactical or lighter, quicker, cheaper improvement now happening in the private realm. So the developers, restaurateurs are seeing that outdoor space is really good for business. It's attractive. It helps them expand. So, you know, recapturing some of that parking lot space and making a people space is to everyone's advantage. And then, of course, 2020 came along, right? You were there, I was there. We all remember what it was like, especially, you know, in that first period, that first phase of lockdown. So pictures like this of, you know, streets that had almost no traffic. This was in March 2020, when, you know, the word out there was stay in your apartment, quarantine, you know, don't go out. And, you know, you had this trend around the country of cities closing the parks, closing the beaches, you know, just telling people, you know, don't go out, stay indoors. And it was, you know, it was, a lot of us had a real fear that public space was going to be going away in some way, that somehow it would fade in importance because there was like a danger element. Fortunately, what happened instead was that by May, you saw lots and lots of experts, the CDC, you know, opinion articles, advocacy groups, you know, all coming out and saying, look, the outdoors is by far the safest place that we can be as a public. You know, parks matter more than they did before. You can't shut people in their houses and apartments forever. And the outdoors is a place where, you know, the contagious COVID-19 is much less of a factor, very safe, in fact, to be outdoors. So, you know, there was a huge change in the tide, I wrote my own article, which was the one that Laura Kunkel spotted, about this phenomenon and about how the public spaces can really become part of the recovery. So, not just places where we have outdoor dining, but places where we can, kids can play safely, and, civic events can happen, and even services can be brought outside, and food and markets, and, a whole variety of things. And from that period of the pandemic, you really just saw this increasing wave of people moving towards parks, whether it was state parks, national parks, city parks. People started showing up in record numbers, and so all of a sudden, in some cases, parks were a little bit overwhelmed, like you see at Yellowstone at the left here. And you started to see this, this image is from a park in New York, where it's a smaller urban park. So people had to be controlled a little bit in terms of how they use the space so that they do spread out. Because, when it's not a big national park where people can go where they want, you have to show them how they can spread out safely. So we saw a lot of innovation and experimentation in this period. And last summer, late summer into the fall, and then this, since that time, depending on, what part of the country you're in, you really saw street space become the setting for restaurants. And so restaurants could stay in business if they were able to use more of the outdoor space for their diners, who would then, be in a safe situation, and operations could continue. And what happened was, so then I'm not sure if you are familiar with the term open streets, but there was an existing movement towards open streets, for the last several years, which is basically the idea that streets are public space too. They, just because a street was built in a certain era to move traffic doesn't mean that it should be dedicated only to traffic till the end of time. And that, in fact, there are a lot of streets that could be taken back for pedestrian use, and bikes, and play streets, and all kinds of public space uses. And that, maybe we've given the car the advantage all this time, for too long, and it's time to think about, like, okay, how can we take more people space back? These streets often are 30% of the fabric of a city or town. That's a very typical statistic. So, I'm not saying that the open streets movement is trying to shut down a whole district to traffic, or to try to pedestrianize the downtown, but it is saying, certain days of the week, sometimes at certain times of the day, if we shut it to traffic, we can create a place that is more accessible for the community at large to use for exercise, for getting outdoors, for kids. And, it's important to realize that a lot of lower income communities don't have easy access to park space. They really have to go pretty far to get to a nice park. And so many of these open streets experiments are trying to extend the amount of public space that's accessible to more people. So, and you see in the headline on the bottom right, in New York, Mayor de Blasio announced that so during the pandemic, this idea really blossomed, and it became a huge movement across this country and other countries as well. It tended to be, I think, especially at the beginning, more in the bigger cities, where park space is more valuable because there's less of it. But cities like Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Denver, Oakland, New York City, they all, during COVID, started an open streets program to create more public space for for the public to get outside. And now there's a big question, for these cities in front of them, do we make this permanent? Do we permanently take some of these streets back for more the public at large to use? And certainly that's happening in New York City, it's happening in Oakland, it's happening in a lot of cities. But it's very dynamic. It's also happening in smaller towns. So, Rockland, Maine, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Breckenridge, Colorado, Springfield, Illinois, even Park Rapids, Minnesota, very small town. So, the movement hasn't been lost on the smaller places at all. And it's really gained a lot of momentum because of the fandom out there. People like having more space to be together. It's good for business. There have been more and more sort of design guidelines that have been issued by different organizations. NACTA, which is the National Association of County Transportation Engineers, New York City Department of Transportation has drawn up a little rule book about okay, here's how this is your design guideline for if you want to install a restaurant in the street that we've given you permission for. Yeah, even myself on the bottom left, working with PPS and a design firm for the Flatiron District in Manhattan that really wanted to expand this idea in a big way. People are even giving out awards at this point for innovation and excellence in this whole COVID pandemic category of public space. So whether it's the parklets or whether it's place streets, there's just a great deal of recognition. And I would say, honestly, since the time COVID really shut us down and then started to reopen, there's been probably 10 years of progress in these areas of innovation around experimenting with public space. It's like I said, it's not like these things weren't happening before, but the rate of adoption from different types of communities around the country and around the world has leaped forward in a way that never would have happened. And again, like you see the statistic in Menlo Park, California, the people want it. Of course, there are some people who will resist. Don't take that parking spot away from me. Don't, I need that left turning lane. But by far the majority of people are coming out in support of these community building spaces that we get to build when we're given this opportunity. Boston, the North End, saw a total transformation. Boston is North End is an Italian neighborhood, very old, beautiful old buildings, old streets, and it's always been a dining hotspot. Definitely one of your tourist destinations. If you go to Boston, you go to the North End, hopefully. But the North End is much, much better since this whole trend that came from COVID hit. Was an idea that was adopted by the North End and the city of Boston. I mean, the North End, I would say today, is much, much closer to its ideal of feeling like a city in Italy than it ever was before. You see far more outdoor seating, far more just people out and enjoying the outdoors, far less traffic that becomes an impediment. So it's very, very interesting. And I guess one of the questions is, where are we going? Where is this all going to end up? There are other forces at play that help us look at that and evaluate that question. So, we're not just being hit by a COVID pandemic, but there are other things that are really affecting how people live and work and think about their future. Housing affordability, is something that has become more and more of an issue in the last 10 years that is really, in a lot of places, another kind of crisis. There's the collapse in trust in government, in the way things have been done, among a lot of people, that's just not there anymore the way we used to assume it would be. And together with that, we've got more polarization. There's the highlight that George Floyd brought to the racial injustice that has always been there, but it's much more of a salient concern for many more people than it was prior. The income inequality, there is in certain cities a rise in crime. It's still not, crime is nowhere near as bad as it was 20 years ago. Crime is still much, much lower than, or the peak of 1991 in New York City, the year I moved there actually, the level of crime is probably one fifth of what it was higher today than it was a year ago today. So in response, we're all doing a big rethink. A lot of people are really looking for some version of what feels safe for them, for this, how to deal with this frustration with the status quo and the way things always have been. The frustration of being isolated, which was already a rising epidemic. And very much a reevaluation of the work-life balance. And do we have to go to the office every day and come home and do that commute every day? Is this, now that we've all had a really good taste, a lot of us, certainly for the privileged people who are maybe more white collar, more knowledge workers, I'm not talking about people who have to show up in a frontline type of job, or the in service to maintaining maintenance workers. All kinds of people don't have the privilege really to reevaluate their work-life balance. But there is a big influence from the people who can make that reevaluation. So I would say COVID is really having this effect as an accelerant to these long-term trends. So I'll talk about a few of those trends. One is the health and wellness trend. So, having more access to the outdoors, more walkable and bikeability is one of the best indicators of real estate value these days. The towns, the properties that are within a walkable neighborhood with access to amenities and restaurants and services, sort of in an old-fashioned Main Street kind of way, are for years have maintained their value and risen in value faster than any other type of property. Outdoor eating and drinking, outdoor work and school environments, these are becoming more and more part of the sort of mainstream in terms of what people are interested in, what they're looking for, certainly what they're considering in terms of their next big move. Another thing is this idea of experiential environments. That simply means attractive, mixed, vibrant places that has a certain density of experience, where you can visit one shop and then you can cross the street and see another one, and all in a safe, nice environment. That's I would say the best expression of it is the old-fashioned Main Street. These are these active outdoor districts where you can shop, meet friends, go to dinner, connect with your neighbors, and more often we're building residential options for people so they don't have to leave those environments. When they leave, they can maybe walk around the corner to an apartment there, or they live in walking distance. And it's what I'm describing here is something that you all would recognize very well. These are high quality environments. They're a lot of these are environments where America in Bloom is hard at work, making that sense of place, creating those experiences. Lifestyle choices. It's very and again, this is not a new thing, but it's being accelerated by COVID. So for many years, there has been a preference paid to walkable communities. And um, it's something called the new economy, which was an idea that emerged, maybe 15 or 20 years ago. It used to be in the old economy, people followed jobs. So, a major auto plant would move to a town in Michigan and attract all kinds of workforce that would move there to get that job. It's not like that anymore. I mean, there are some exceptions, but what's much more true today is that people are selecting places where they want to live, and they're selecting them for these qualities that I've been talking about. Is it attractive? Is it welcoming? Is it beautiful? Is it walkable? Does it have amenities? And that's where they want to live. And so then in a reversal, the jobs are following those trends. So the jobs are following the people to the places that have, the most to offer. And we're also looking for connection. We're looking for belonging. We're looking to reduce the isolation that we might experience in some kinds of communities and get over that in others. So this is a very powerful force that's been at work for quite some time. But in this age of uncertainty, you're certainly seeing people make life decisions around, where do I want to live, that I'm going to feel safe, that I'm going to feel good, that I'm going to feel like I belong to a community. And then the future of work is a big, big question. There's, when we're talking about office work, particularly, and knowledge workers, which again are the pool of people who can most easily adapt to using Zoom for a meeting instead of showing up in person. These people, who number in the millions, are opting out of the rat race. They see the advantage of having a hybrid model for work, where they may not have to go into the office at all, or they may go in once or twice a week. And they've gotten a taste of that, and they're not going to let it go. So what that may mean is that there's a bit of a shuffle that's going on. You've already seen some moving related to COVID, but a lot of it was actually younger people who were, living in small apartments in big cities, going home to live with their parents for a while. They're not going to stay there if they have any choice in the matter. Those people are probably going to move back to the cities, and in fact, they're already moving back to the cities, because big cities have a certain appeal to that, especially to younger people. And that's not going to go away. But there is a natural reshuffling that happens to other members of the population who hit a certain point in their life, whether they're having kids, or whether they're retiring, or whether they're just ready for something different. And what you are seeing is that there's many, many more of people in those groups who are making the decision this year to move somewhere else and to do something differently and to change their life. And they're bringing their big city or bigger town sensibilities with them, by the way. So they may be moving to your town of 4,000 people, but they are bringing exciting new ideas. They're bringing high expectations. They're paying attention to the flowers that are planted on Main Street. And these people will all be terrific supporters for AIB members. And one thing that has become more and more obvious, and that the real estate industry is really just catching on to, is that it's not so much the building that's important, it's the neighborhood. So there's a certain amount you can provide, all the bells and whistles that you want in a building to try to attract people to, whether it's a building where people work, or it's an apartment building. But the bigger question mark above everybody is, what kind of neighborhood is that to live in? And so what you see is public space is really at the center. So we've traveled a long way from last March, when we were afraid that public spaces were going to be, no-go zones, to this point of realization where there's much wider agreement than ever before that public spaces are essential, that they're at the center of our communities, the way that we relate to them, what we value in them, and that they really are essential infrastructure. And what do we do with that information? And I guess that's how I want to sort of bring this to a close. What do we do with that information? That recognition that all of a sudden public spaces, America in Bloom, also my work, are in the spotlight. Everywhere you look, they're being looked at as part of the solution. Richard Florida, who's a writer and a thinker and a professor, recently wrote, this is, he calls this a once in a century opportunity to reimagine and build better communities and workplaces. He even goes so far as to say, much as after the Spanish influenza, there was the Roaring 20s, he predicts that there's going to be a kind of similar Roaring 2020s that will be very much exhibit the preferences I've been talking about towards places that feel good and feel safe to people. So, and think about the fact that if this incremental, smaller scale placemaking and the work that you all do is part of the picture, where is it in the infrastructure bill? It's not there. You won't see flowers as a line item in whatever infrastructure bill comes forward, no matter if the Democrats get their preferred version or if there's a smaller version. I'm pretty sure there's going to be some kind of infrastructure bill. We don't know what it's going to look like. It probably won't look like the Biden proposal originally, but I can guarantee you it's not going to have flowers on the diagram that you see here. And that is something, that's another thing for America in Bloom to really think about, because, in a way, it really should be. There's a great project that I love to talk about in Indianapolis. And, maybe some of you are from there or have been there. It's called the Indianapolis Cultural Trail. And it was this idea that the city wanted to connect the museums and different cultural institutions in downtown with a walking and biking trail. And but the way they did it was, it's one of the smartest infrastructure and placemaking projects I've ever seen, because they think of it as all these multiple outcomes that they're looking for. So, for example, they did create a much improved biking, walking environment for downtown, that in a downtown that really needed it, that really favored traffic and wide streets and narrow sidewalks. They've created a linear park that is 30 or 40 acres at this point, I think, in downtown, that's become its own attraction. People actually go to downtown just to get on the cultural trail. So it's no longer just a connection between destinations. It's a destination in itself. It includes rain gardens throughout. So most of the plantings that you see along the cultural trail catch stormwater. They're all rain gardens. And of course, the paving is also permeable. So it is a really great project that handles stormwater. So it's a flood control project. It's a beautification project. So the public art is really wonderful. And a result of all those things is that it's an economic development project. So there hasn't been a recent study. There was a study done at least 6 years ago that calculated that already $1 billion in private investment had been spent along the cultural trail, specifically as a result catalyzed by the cultural trail, because it created places where people wanted to be, where they wanted to live or open a restaurant or open a store. And so I just think about your own mission, And I picked out a part of it here, envisioning communities across the country as welcoming and vibrant places to live, work, and play, benefiting from colorful plants and trees, enjoying clean environments, celebrating heritage, planting pride through volunteerism. There are a lot of people who share that mission with you in their own way. So I really think you're at the center of an opportunity if you choose to grab hold of it. So the COVID era search for a better way to live, we've been talking about, this moment of city innovation that's really very dynamic and very easily influenced by new partners who come in. This potential influx of infrastructure funding, and then this wide range of open-minded partners. And I can't tell you how many phone calls I've had in the last few months with partners who never would have taken my call in previous years. There's absolutely a new sense of openness and a new sense among organizations and partners of, we're open-minded to anything. Pitch us anything. Let's hear what you got to say. We're not gonna be like in the same box that we were before. So that's a huge opportunity. And who are some of these partners? They could be your city planners, they could be downtown organizations, placemakers, biking and walking advocates, climate action groups, park advocates, health professionals, certainly economic development organizations. If they're not already, in close talks with America in Bloom, then they really should be. And I just think about the projects that are happening around the country that you could influence. So across the top there, you see, what are at this point very typical interventions that have happened in the last 12 months, from dining in the street to improvised bike lanes. And then across the bottom is America in Bloom's really high quality projects that take everything to the next level. And so these people who are trying all of this experimentation in public space, they need you. They really need you. And you need them, because you can take what you do and amplify it 10 times, 100 times, and really have an impact. And I'll just finish with this quote: even the largest avalanche is triggered by small things. And again, it goes back to the fact that you are doing small things, but you're doing it in a way that has huge impact. And I think you have an opportunity to really expand that impact if you want to. So thank you for that time. It was a great privilege to talk to you. I wish you the best in your symposium, and please be in touch. Thank you.
Well, Phil, thank you. I absolutely love placemaking. I think it's fascinating. And in my line of work, tourism and promoting community, placemaking is so critical. So every time we get something large or even something small, I mean, you even have the chairs, the Adirondack chairs in the park, even something like that where visitors and residents can go and just relax outside of their own, four walls, is so important. And so your message just kept hitting home to me over and over and over again, as we've seen this transition of what communities are doing, not only for their visitors and for their residents, with the outdoor dining and the public spaces. And so I know that I thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you so much. I'm sure a lot of probably most of our attendees enjoyed it as well. So I just wanted to throw that in there, just because I get super, super geeked when I hear about placemaking. So thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Perfect. So we did have a question, and it's from Frank. He's always a really good person to throw some curveballs at us. First of all, he said, great presentation, absolutely enjoyed it. And then, did your organization provide lighter, quicker, cheaper canned solutions, or do communities usually develop custom ones? Second part of that question is, should America in Bloom create a few canned solutions for communities to use as proof of concept?
Well, to the first question, it's always been a process working with a community, with a group of active community members. I can imagine they're the same kind of people who are America in Bloom members. So it's not out of a can, it's not out of a box. On the other hand, I would say it's okay if you have some typologies, some preformed solutions that fit different kinds of physical conditions, so that you can maybe speed up the process of working with a community to select something and develop a solution that's right for them. So I think as things mature, we could see kind of both happening to the best advantage. What was the second part of the question again, Linda?
It says, well, should America in Bloom create a few canned solutions for their communities to use as proof of concept?
Yeah, what do you think about that, Linda? I couldn't say for sure, but it seems like whatever helps you provide more access to what you offer, so that there's more of it out there, improving our communities, right?
Right. No, I think that, it's interesting because that's what we do as communities. And that's really what our organization is about. So that when we come together, even virtually, that we can share and network. The framework of America in Bloom is to, help these communities become better places to live, work, and play. I mean, everything, it was interesting because at the very end of what you said just really validated what we do as an organization, that we are on the right track. And then we have the right strategies and visions, and really trying to help these communities, thrive, to be more thriving. I just keep looking back at Holland in our own community, and we talked about outdoor dining. In our community, our downtown development allowed the restaurants to extend their footprint onto the sidewalks and into the parking spaces. So we took those parking spaces, and it was so popular that they extended it. We created a social district, and in the state of Michigan, that just means that you can have you can get a beverage, a cocktail, an alcoholic beverage, and walk around in certain areas. So that I know different states, they call it something different, but we would have never had that opportunity to do that pre-pandemic. So just like you had said, we're kind of nudged along and forced to, hey, let's reevaluate and look at what we have. And going back to our communities and what we're doing, that's what we do. I know that, I want Holland to be successful, and there's a contest component to it, but really at the end of the day, it's like, what are you doing in your community, and what are you doing in your community? And it's all that idea sharing that's so important.
Yeah, no, I hope that all of this is an accelerant for America in Bloom as well. And like I said at the beginning of the presentation, the America in Bloom communities are the kind of communities where I would want to live personally. And I feel like there's an impression that you all are helping to make, that is making that true for so many people. And it probably has more impact than you're even aware of.
Yeah, I believe it. Well, that's all the time that we have today, Phil. Thank you so much. I can't say enough about how excited I am about the session. I'm certainly going to go back and listen to it again. So thank you again for joining us, and we really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'll maybe bump into you in the conference along the way.
That would be awesome. Okay, take care.
Bye.